It might be controversial to say, but what Final Fantasy XVI is doing is what I've wanted to see the series do for a very long time. The direction of the characters, the darker and more mature presentation on the story. And brace yourself for the biggest hot take so far, I absolutely adore this action combat system, at least what we've seen so far. From my perspective, this game is shaping up to be incredible, and I absolutely believe it's going to be a top tier mainline entry. Now with that being said, there is one barrier to Final Fantasy XVI success that a lot of people have been talking about recently, and it's something that I want to make a video on because it's going to deeply impact the rest of the franchise, including Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button, because there's a whole lot more FF16 news coming leading up to the launch on June 22nd. But one of the biggest concerns that people have before that launch is the PS5 exclusivity, and how it is going to limit the game's overall sales. First and foremost, I think it's important to acknowledge that not even major Sony titles have been PS5 exclusive, with big titles such as God of War Ragnarok and Horizon Forbidden West also running on PS4. In terms of other PS5 console exclusives, they've also come to PC as a simultaneous launch. And yes, there is a handful of true PS5 exclusives like Demon's Souls, but again, there's not really a ton of them quite yet. And that's because there's not enough PS5 yet for these games to sell quite what the publishers want them to sell. But now we are getting closer to the turning point. PlayStation 5 has sold 38 million units since April, and with the supply situation finally being worked out, you can actually walk into a store and buy a PlayStation 5. Something that's absolutely crazy considering this console has been out for almost 3 years. Not to mention, there is a Final Fantasy XVI PS5 bundle coming, which for people looking to buy a PS5 specifically to play FF16, which I know is many of you, this is a pretty convenient package, and it'll also allow you to play Rebirth when it comes out. But it does have some people worried that this will not be a high-selling Final Fantasy game, and I'm here to say not only do I think it will be a high-selling Final Fantasy game, I also think that it doesn't necessarily need to be. But first and foremost, I think the important thing to note is that this probably is not going to be the fastest selling Final Fantasy game. In fact, when it launches, I think it might actually be one of the slowest selling games in the series. Again, when you compare this to something like Final Fantasy VII Remake, which launched into a PS4 install base of 110 million, or Final Fantasy 15, which launched into an install base of 100 million PS4s and Xbox Ones, there are a lot less potential buyers here, which means it's very doubtful to me that this game is going to explode on day one. And the other reason is, as much as a sensitive subject as this can be in the Final Fantasy community, while I know a lot of Final Fantasy fans personally love these games, there are also other Final Fantasy fans and the more casual audience who found these games to be extremely lackluster. And while Final Fantasy XIV is a success now, Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 was not. And as a result, they are hesitant to buy Final Fantasy XVI. This is something that Naoki Yoshida has acknowledged in previous interviews, such as this interview with 4Gamer where he says, quote, "The impressions that Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 and Final Fantasy XV have left on people are recognized as an indelible part of history. For example, even though Final Fantasy XIV was successful in rebuilding itself, it caused a huge uproar in the history of online games. While I personally see it as a good game that took on a challenge, there are many people who point out that Final Fantasy XV feels incomplete without DLCs, and even though there are many people who love FF15 and continue to support it, we have to accept these facts if we're going to take on the responsibility of creating a new game." This being said, the current Final Fantasy XIV alongside Final Fantasy VII Remake have done a lot to restore faith in the FF brand, and while you see more and more people being comfortably excited for FF games again, I don't think 16 is truly out of the dark work until it releases to much success and good reviews that allow these people who are on the fence to have a degree of confidence about it. This being said, I think this game is going to have a slow burn effect, where it will be very well critically reviewed. There will be a lot of good word of mouth about the game, and I think that will give the game legs to continue to sell long term. So as more people continue to adopt PS5s, Final Fantasy XVI will be a highly recommended game for them. Nier Automata is an example of a game that has continued to sell well throughout the course of its life. And the reason is everyone from reviewers to content creators to just regular fans have spread the good word of this game. In other words, if Square Enix makes a good game, people will know about it and they will find it. Even if it's not this massive explosion in the launch window, which I don't think Final Fantasy XVI will be. That being said, Sony is heavily padding Square Enix's wallets with Final Fantasy XVI and Rebirth. Hence why they can't talk about this game without talking about the power of the PS5 every few seconds. While Yoshi P and Koji Fox have made a good meme of it, it's incredibly clear to me that it's in their contract that they need to remind people that this is the power of the PS5. And if Sony wants to cut me a check, I'll talk about the power of the PS5 too. They are well aware that this is going to make the game sell less units overall. However, this is the price that Sony's willing to pay in order to keep the game exclusive to their platform. So in either case, I think Final Fantasy XVI is going to be okay and do a lot better than people think it's going to. And I think that even if it doesn't necessarily explode in the way that some are hoping for, it'll still be considered a success with a lot less, simply due to how much money that Sony is pumping into this one. But I also think this game is going to do numbers over the course of its lifetime. We've seen Final Fantasy 15 do that, and I think this game is going to be much better received than FF15 was. And almost all of this applies to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as well. Long story short, guys, Final Fantasy is going to be okay, and that is a very good thing to hear and a very good thing to say. Shout out to Morgana Raven and the rest of the Ultima community.